Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second part in this Adult Catechesis Series for the Jubilee Year. Last week we heard from Father Hayes on the biblical roots of the Jubilee Year, and that is available. If you missed it, it is available on YouTube and Facebook to go back and watch. This evening, we're delighted to have Father Edmund Ditton, parochial vicar here at St. Patrick's, and for many years, professor of church history at the Angelicum in Rome. No stranger to St. Patrick's, because he would come and help out here all those summers when he was in Rome. And so I thought, who better to have talk to us about the history of the Jubilee Year than Father Edmund and all the time that he spent in Rome. So do you want to start with prayer? Do you want me to open with prayer?
Yeah.
All right, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Mighty God, we give you thanks for the blessings of your mercy and your grace. Help us to always turn to you with hearts and minds made pure. And we pray in the words that Jesus taught us, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So without further ado, please welcome Father Edmund.
Thank you. It's been a little rough getting, readjusted to the idea of standing in front of a bunch of people and telling them about something, but I'm settling down. All right, last week we did hear about the biblical roots of all this. And as Father Hayes told us, there really isn't any direct connection between ancient Hebrew practice, if it even was a practice, if it actually worked out the way it was supposed to according to the law. And that's a big question. We saw how kind of impractical much of it was. But the church was inspired by much the same kind of thinking. And they had this precedent before them. And so the church in time is going to latch on to this idea, this vision of a year of liberation, a year of cancellation of debt, a year of restoration. And it's going to take it in a new direction. And as we go through the history of the papal jubilees, you'll see how that direction is constantly shifting, for one thing. Over the course of 7 centuries, obviously the church has been through a lot of different experiences, a big, great roller coaster ride through the centuries. The Jubilees are always a product of that and a response to what's going on. All right, that's one thing to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is that Jubilees, just as they were in ancient Israel, are going to end up in the church's understanding of the Jubilee, are going to end up as kind of it's sort of a two-edged sword. It's obviously an intensely spiritual experience and meant to be something that will connect the faithful to their God. But it's also a celebration, just as it was in ancient Israel, a celebration of joy, an experience that's designed almost, we can say, for the whole person, spirit, soul, and body. And so there's another theme that we'll be able to trace through all this development that goes on here over the course of these 700 years. Let's just start with the invitation, the first invitation to one of these Jubilee years, one of these holy years. The first papal jubilee was proclaimed by Pope Boniface VIII by means of a papal bull in which he makes the public announcement of this event, a bull which he promulgated on, get the date here, February 22nd, 1300, Feast of the Chair of Peter. Maybe we're going to start seeing a pattern here. Well, we will. It seems not to have been a great planned event, but something that rose up spontaneously among the faithful in Rome, to which the Pope was responding. Preparations are a little bit hurried, as you can imagine, for a last-minute thing. Somehow it's all very Italian, you know. What have the people been doing, and what have they been saying? Well, it seems that over the last couple of months, you know, as of, February of 1300, it seems that ever since like Christmas time, Rome has had more pilgrims than usual. People are flocking in noticeably larger numbers than usual. Well, why? It's the turn of a century, for one thing. This is the kind of time when hopes are high and anxieties are high, and people are looking for something that will give them hope and something that will allay their anxieties. You know, didn't we go all through this in the year 2000? Right? People have been especially coming to visit St. Peter's Basilica simply because they've heard. The word is out. They've heard that extraordinary spiritual benefits will be granted to people who do. Just come, say a prayer at the tomb of the apostle, and graces will be poured out upon you. This is truly a grassroots movement here, to which the Pope, rather hastily, adapts himself by proclaiming this jubilee. I have here a piece, anyway, of the bull which he issued announcing the Jubilee year. And here you'll start to see things come together, right? So we have a kind of grassroots call for something from God. And we have the Pope, kind of the one that they're addressing, asking for something, begging for something, and the Pope answers. The Pope responds to their desires. We'll see it all in the text of the bull itself. Here's part of what he says in this document. A trustworthy record of the ancients reports that those who came to the honorable Basilica of the Prince of the Apostles in the city were granted copious remissions of sins and indulgences. We'll come back to indulgences. We, therefore, holding such remissions and indulgences, all and individually, as valid and pleasing, confirm and approve them by our apostolic authority. Confident in the mercy of God Almighty and in the merits and authority of his same apostles, with the counsel of our brothers and in the fullness of apostolic power, we grant and will grant to all those who approach these basilicas with reverence and having confessed and truly done penance in this present time and in any of the centennial years that follow, not only a full and generous, but indeed the most complete pardon of all their sins. All right, and there's more to this. The conditions for obtaining this plenary indulgence, a full and complete pardon for all of your sins. The conditions are all spelled out in here. The faithful who come are required to visit the Basilica of St. Peter, the Basilica of St. Paul, a specified number of times in order to obtain this. And that's pretty much it. Right? It's an event that comes together so quickly, comes together in a way that's kind of unexpected, but it's not unprecedented. Because popes have been doing this for a while. Popes have been in this business for some time already. Two things to note about what the Pope himself says and what we'll see unfolding over the whole course of this continuing development of the papal jubilee. The Pope, you notice in his bull, mentions the tradition that anybody who comes to visit the apostles, their tombs, prays at those tombs, receives special graces. This is something that's built right into the whole tradition that he's received. A tradition of revolving around the whole idea of the cult of the saints, and expressed particularly in this idea of pilgrimage to their shrines, pilgrimage to their tombs, prayers there, knowing that they're listening and that they will relay your requests to God and you'll get a hearing. This is built right into the Christian experience. It's been there almost since the very beginning. We can go all the way back into at least the 2nd century and find the church encouraging visits to the tombs of the saints, and the people sort of naturally seeking out the tombs of the saints to go there and pray and receive these special graces. Right? Here's the grassroots part, the movement from the bottom up, that desire of the people for spiritual security, for help in time of need, for whatever. This is part of the rationale for his response to this cry for comfort in his own time. And, well, what does he go on to say? We, therefore, holding such remissions and indulgences as valid and pleasing, confirm and approve them by our apostolic authority. Here's the other pole here. The tradition of pilgrimage and devotion to the saints as intermediaries with God, and this idea of apostolic authority, which the popes have inherited from their predecessors all the way back to Peter and Paul. Keep these two things in mind, because we're constantly going to be coming back to these things. And you can see already, I think, here how what we have beginning here in 1300 is a reflection of the very thing that I started off with, this idea of the Jubilees being spiritual experiences on the one hand, but experiences for the whole person on the other. We are at this event, in spite of a little bit of scrambling to get all sorts of things ready. You have to. You're expecting a great number of people. There are a great number of people who are already showing up. You have to make sure there are places where they can stay. You have to make sure that there's enough food brought into the city to feed them. Pope's responsible for all this. This is his city. I think they even opened up a new gate in the city wall to, funnel people in and out more efficiently. Things have to be done, but it turns out to be a great success for all those people who have come with such high hopes and expectations, a great success for the Pope, because this is a boost to his apostolic authority. Right? It's not an unprecedented event, though. This has been growing for some time. Right? We talked about pilgrimage beginning very early on. The tomb of St. Peter himself, the first little monument. If you know anything about the archaeological excavations that have gone on under St. Peter's, The tomb itself has been marked by a kind of monument since the 2nd century. It's all there, with the modern high altar piled right up above it. It's all there. Ever since the 2nd century, pilgrims have been coming to Rome to pay their respects to the Prince of the Apostles and to pray to him. And that's been continued up to this point, right down through the centuries. In the 4th century, you have the popes, almost going out of their way, really, to accommodate the people who are coming now from all over the Roman Empire, now that it's been Christianized, to visit those shrines. You have popes in the 4th century who are, altering the landscape of Rome to make it easier to get to these places, to go down into the catacombs, to visit the tombs of the martyrs. Rome's got it all. Rome has is not only a church that has an apostolic foundation, but it has the remains of the 2 greatest apostles, 2 of them. Nobody else can claim that. And it's got martyrs galore buried out in those cemeteries. Rome is from the 4th century at least, it is already a pilgrimage destination. And the Pope is the custodian of all of this. All right, this kind of instantly raises the Pope head and shoulders above all the other bishops of the Christian world. But there's more to it than that. It's not just that he presides over this treasure trove of martyrs' relics. It's because of the way in which his own status continues to rise over the whole of this period, from being the successor of Peter and recognized as such throughout the world, to the early Middle Ages, when he is the only authority in the whole Western world that everyone can look to. And as you continue on in the medieval period, the way in which his real spiritual authority translates into practical authority over the whole church of the Western world, people are going to look to the Pope for leadership, for guidance, for everything. He'll come to be seen, as we arrive at around the year 1300, as not just the custodian of the shrines, not just a facilitator for all of those pilgrims who come to visit them, but he'll come to be seen as the dispenser of those graces, because as successor of Peter, he is heir also to that power of the keys which Christ conferred upon him. He is the one who can unlock this treasure house of spiritual graces. And we see that also in the bull. The desire of the people, their natural instinct to seek out the holy places and the tombs of the saints is confirmed, as he says, confirmed and approved by him, the supreme spiritual authority. And, well, by the time you get to 1300, he's got a good claim to be the supreme authority in every respect in the Western world. The papacy has grown from, just being one more local bishop of an important city, to be sure, but one more local bishop. It's grown to a stature which nobody would have ever dreamt of in those early centuries. Popes have become the equals of kings, the superiors of kings. Take somebody like Pope Innocent III at the beginning of the 13th century, who can pretty much snap his fingers and all the crowned heads of Europe fall into line. His authority is enormous. His moral standing is enormous. He is seen as the dispenser of all graces. And so, he seems to think nothing at all of issuing this invitation to the Christian world to come to Rome and receive those graces which are mediated through the martyrs, through the great apostles, through all of those people who are buried right here in this city, and through me. Taking the form of this plenary indulgence, an indulgence which covers everything. You have to go to confession, of course. It's not a get-out-of-jail-free ticket. You have to go to confession. But all of the temporal punishment for sin, in layman's language, that's time in purgatory, can be wiped clean. It's all a pretty good deal. And it's there because of the Pope and because of all of those holy men and women who are there all around him, surrounding the city like a crown. Well, this gets things started. That Jubilee of 1300 turns out to be pretty successful as people flock in to receive these blessings. It's so successful, in fact, that people want more. Shortly after these events that we've been describing in 1300, shortly after this, which must have been for Pope Boniface VIII a great personal triumph. He's sort of in between big battles now with the King of France, and this is a momentary lull in the hostilities. He's soon going to be humiliated in a way that no pope has ever been humiliated, but that's another story. But this must have been a great moment for him. He has shown the world the power of his office. He has shown the world the power of that prince of those twin princes of the apostles who are right there in his own backyard. And the people have received exactly what they had come for. They received this moment of liberation in which all those sins and the punishment due for them, the sufferings that would still have to be endured before your entrance into heaven, are relieved instantly by papal decree. By 1343, another Roman delegation comes to see the Pope. The Pope at this moment is not residing in Rome. Another long story. This is the period, the long period, 70 years, in which the popes lived in Avignon in the south of France. If you know anything about the so-called Avignon captivity of the church, This is the result of, poor Boniface's humiliation, that the popes, sort of leave Rome behind for a while and live in a place that's, well, maybe a little more welcoming, a little more livable, but also because they've once again fallen under the domination of a powerful secular figure. But a little delegation of Roman notables goes to see him. They ask him to change, make an adjustment in the frequency of these Jubilee celebrations. Right? Notice that Boniface had said in every centennial year after this. Next one would be 1400. We haven't even gotten to the halfway point. People are still looking for the same things. They still are looking for that fullness of that fullness of grace that only the Pope can offer them, as he channels God's grace coming down through the apostles and through himself to the whole Church of God. And they want to see some more of this, How many people are ever going to live to see that next Jubilee? Nobody is going to live from 1300 to 1400. And Boniface may have been thinking of the ancient Roman celebration of what they called the secular games, which were held every 100 years, precisely so that nobody would be able to say that he remembered the last time. Boniface may have had that in mind, the back of his mind somewhere. But they want more. They want it now. They want it immediately, because this is a very difficult time in Italy and especially in Rome, with the Pope out of town. He's been out of town now for 25 years. What's happening in Rome? Rome is drying up and ready to blow away. Rome lives off the papacy. What is Rome going to do with no Pope in residence, with the whole papal court moved elsewhere? All those people who would have been working there, all that army of scribes and secretaries and various other bureaucratic hangers-on, don't have jobs. Pilgrims are still coming to Rome, of course, but without the Pope, well, they're not really getting their money's worth. They don't stay as long. It's an economic disaster for the city of Rome. These people who come to him aren't churchmen. These are the nobility, the governors of the city. They're coming, pleading. See the mix of things again? The spiritual blessings and how they mix with much more temporal affairs. We'll see more. Well, the Pope accedes to their request, and he will designate the year 1350 as a Jubilee year. Well, 1350 arrives, much to, I can imagine how thankful these Romans were that the Pope had granted their request. But the 1350 Jubilee turns out to be a bit of a bust. Right? The Pope isn't there. One of the reasons why people come, along with Peter and Paul and the spiritual graces, they come to see the Pope. They come to see this great man, this man who is practically, who as the successor of Peter, as kind of Peter incarnate. They come to see him, and if he's not there, half the attraction is gone. Right? This is the way things are. This is human nature. This is the way of the world. But the Pope here, Clement VI, establishes a new precedent. These celebrations will now be held every 50 years. And he also takes the time to sit down and kind of codify the requirements for gaining the plenary indulgence, which is, the supreme benefit that the Pope can dispense. And that's basically what he lays out for us in his bull announcing the new Holy Year. Again, you'll hear more about indulgences, but in his bull, he sort of lays out the principle of indulgence and the mechanics of the indulgence in a way that still sets the standard today. But I want to save indulgences for next week, because next week you're going to hear about the mechanics of all this, what an indulgence is, what it does. But we mention it here because this is what is on offer. Oh, I should say this too. Another reason why the 1350 Jubilee is a bit of a fizzle is, not only is the Pope not in town, but the Black Death has just swept across Europe in 1348, 1349, killing, 25% or maybe 33% of the whole population of the continent. People are a little too scared to go anyplace, in shell shock. But maybe that explains why they feel they need the prayers all the more. The remainder of the 14th century, say from 1350 on into the 15th century, is a rather confused time for Italy, as all sorts of people are fighting over it, and a confused time for the papal jubilee as well. Between the Pope's long absence in Avignon and then when they finally return, it's only about 2 years before they find themselves, before the whole Western Church finds itself divided, with a Pope in Rome and another Pope who's gone back to Avignon. This means, well, which of these popes do you turn to? It all gets kind of complicated and confusing. Popes are also going to be tinkering throughout this period with the intervals. We went from every 100 years to every 50 years. There'll be a brief period when it will be reduced to every 33 years, one of those numbers again. It'll settle back to 50. There will also be changes in the number of stops and what the requirements are to receive that indulgence when you come to Rome. Originally it had been a certain number of visits to St. Peter's, a certain number of visits to St. Paul, all within a certain time frame. Over these years it's extended to 4 churches that you're supposed to go around to visit: the Lateran, the Pope's Cathedral, and Mary Major, and these are still the 4 that are visited as part of the Holy Year requirements today. Another little innovation during these days is the inauguration of the very first Holy Door for a Jubilee held in the odd number year of 1423. How they got that, complicated. There's a lot going on, but it's all still kind of make it up as you go along. But the intention throughout this is to, 1, meet the needs and the demands, and Roman mobs can get pretty insistent about demanding things. Meet those needs, meet those spiritual yearnings that people have. And also try to rebuild papal authority, which has been through a number of shocks by now. All right, 1300, and now this second Jubilee in 1350, and establishing a new pattern, but 150 years or so, 100 years or so thereafter, where it's still not being It hasn't become an institution yet. But from 1450 on, the popes of the Renaissance era, and then on, past 1550 or so, into the Baroque era, we'll see steady progress in institutionalizing this hastily cobbled together notion of the Jubilee. Jubilees during these days are going to be surrounded with ever more pomp and pageantry, whenever, that is, papal finances will allow it, whenever political disputes will allow it. But the whole idea is to rebuild papal authority and to revive, the faith of the people who are living in such troubled times. Now, sometimes the popes of this age got a little carried away, transforming Rome into, a magnificent stage for a great show. A great show of papal authority, a great show of devotion, but always a mix. A good example of the success of these things, once you get past the Reformation, when I think, papal prestige hits its low point, and the whole idea of, I suppose you'll hear something about this next week too, the whole idea of the indulgence, becomes the war cry of Northern Europe. A time in which Rome is going to be sacked, not by Protestants coming down over the Alps, but by the Holy Roman Emperor himself, because the Pope has crossed him politically. This is a bad time for the Church in many respects, but popes are doing what they can, or what they think they need to do, to try and restore things, to get people to pray, to get people to come here and visit the shrines, to get here to beg God to be relieved of all these troubles. The popes, obviously, for all of their faults, are spiritual men. They want to see the faith of the people grow. The Council of Trent, another great papal project of the Counter-Reformation era. The Council of Trent goes a long way toward reviving the faith of the Catholic world, goes a long way to correcting some of the abuses that have crept in over the years, goes a long way even to, for a while, toning down the pomp and circumstance of papal jubilees. There's a jubilee that's held in 1550, right there in St. Peter's Basilica. Everybody turns out, but there's a whole new kind of flavor to it now. The Jubilee is now a mirror for the new, rejuvenated Catholic Church. Getting back to basics, getting back to prayer, getting back to seriousness of purpose, getting back to authentic spirituality, and defending the eternal truths that have been passed on to it against all comers. The great Jubilee of the year 1600 is another triumph. Pope Clement VIII presides over ceremonies that reportedly drew hundreds of thousands of people to Rome. There were supposed to have been 80,000 alone on the first day, the opening day of the Jubilee, when he opened that holy door at St. Peter's, the newly built St. Peter's, another monument to the new strength of the Catholic Church. 80,000 people are supposed to have been there in that square just to watch him open the door. And so it's going to continue. But alongside all the great political events and all these struggles of the church that the church has to go through during these days, all the ups and downs, from the wild spendthrift popes of the Renaissance to the sober spiritual popes like Pope Pius IX, who didn't want any display anywhere in Rome, because they thought it all led to a bad end. Through all of that, there's also that very practical business of accommodating people, finding places for them to stay, putting on something that they will remember for the rest of their lives. Because that experience of visiting a new place, making what might be a long journey to get there, all the things that you're going to see and do along the way, all of that's part of the Jubilee experience too. It had always been part of the Pilgrim's experience, and now that the two of them have come together, the pilgrimage in the service of under the guidance of papal authority and in the service of papal authority reinforcing the pilgrimage as a spiritual event. All of that's going to have its effect. This will now continue right on through the 17th century and into the 18th. By the 18th century, going to Rome for the Jubilee, whether you're Catholic or not, is part of the grand tour. All sorts of people who had no experience of Catholicism at all but wanted to see the show come back with maybe a few other things to think about. And the popes are always at pains to foster that kind of thing. But okay, it's the 18th century now. 1725 goes okay. 1750 goes okay. 1775 even goes okay. 1775, one notable event during that time is that the Pope, Pius VI, addresses his invitation to come to Rome for this great celebration, not only to the Catholics of the world, but to everybody. It's kind of almost an ecumenical gesture here in 250 years ago. But there are clouds on the horizon once again. And, well, you know what they are. The French Revolution breaking out in 1789. Revolution then spreading throughout Europe, turning into a world war. The whole world lined up against Napoleon Bonaparte. Here's another rough time for the church. In 1798, Napoleon's army, having just thrashed the Austrians up in the north of Italy, descends down into the peninsula and occupies the city of Rome. The Pope, Pius VI, now an old man, is carried off to France as a prisoner. He's going to die there, still in captivity. A lot of people thought this would be the end of the papacy, the end of the Catholic Church, the end of everything. We'd all be free, liberty, equality, fraternity. Their idea of liberation is rather different from the Church's ideas about liberation. But obviously, it means that there's not going to be any Jubilee in the year 1800. This is the first time they've missed one. And I should say there have been other Jubilees as well. There's a distinction made between ordinary Jubilees, which follow the calendar, and the set number of years, whatever it may be. But there are also, alongside of those, there are extraordinary Jubilees called for various occasions. In fact, there are far more extraordinary Jubilees than there have been ordinary ones. But there's no celebrations of anything in 1800. There's very little to celebrate. The church throughout Europe is in disarray. Priests and bishops are in exile if they haven't had their heads cut off. Church property everywhere has been seized, nationalized, pillaged. Rome itself captured once again by a foreign invader and somebody who's not too friendly to the church. So 1800 is the first Jubilee that has actually been missed according to the calendar. By 1825, Napoleon is history, and the popes are back in Rome, back in power. It's once again their city. And everybody in these days is, these days in which traditionalists are all much relieved at the way things have turned out, everybody hopes that things will get back to something like normal. The 1825 Jubilee goes off pretty much as normal. It's a celebration of the Church's triumph once again over all those worldly powers which would seek to destroy it. Once again, we have survived and emerged victorious. But that spirit is still out there in the world. The next scheduled Jubilee would be 1850. Yeah, 1850 is another bad year. In 1849, Rome is going to be occupied once again, this time by Giuseppe Garibaldi and his red shirts, all these people who are now rising up to create a new modern Italy, a united Italy, and end this nonsense of all these petty principalities, and end in particular this nonsense of a papal state. They take over Rome for a while, and the Pope has to flee, taking refuge down the Kingdom of Naples, down south, until a French army, well, helping the Pope out this time, until a French army comes and liberates the city and gives it back to him. No Jubilee is held in 1850 either, even though the Pope, Pius IX, from his exile, will dutifully proclaim one. But it's obvious when Rome is under siege, when Rome is occupied by the enemy, when the French army has to fight its way in to drive them out. Quite clear once again that there isn't going to be any Jubilee. (1875). They just keep coming around, and every year it's a spin of the wheel. You know, is it going to be a year in which all the Pope's hopes for a really great Jubilee, a really great experience of liberation, real Christian liberation, and an experience of the tremendous authority of the church are going to triumph once more, or is it going to be another disaster? You never know. In 1875, there's once again no Jubilee. It's not that there's any war going on at the moment, just at the moment, but the popes have finally been defeated as, at least insofar as their temporal role in the world goes. In 1870, the Kingdom of Italy, which had in fact come together everywhere except in the Papal States, the Kingdom of Italy occupies the city of Rome and annexes it to the new kingdom. The Pope, well, if you know anything about all the trials of Pius IX in these days, he's run out of town once in 1849. This time he doesn't leave, he doesn't abandon ship. This time, though, he simply retreats into the Vatican Palace and says, if you want me, you come and get me. And you see what the whole rest of the Catholic world will say about you if you slap me around the way people had long before slapped Pope Boniface around. You see what will happen. Well, what happens then is that there's a standoff. The Pope claims still to be the ruler of Rome, the ruler of his papal state, which had been his for 1,000 years, the basis of his temporal power. The King of Italy, King Victor Emmanuel, thinks this is all just rather comical, The Pope has no importance in this world any longer, but he still thinks he does. As for his claims to still be the rightful sovereign of the whole world, counts for nothing as far as the Italian state is concerned. An Italian state which is by now, definitely anti-clerical and irreligious, and glories in that. But there's nothing really he can do. He can't just simply drive the Pope out one more time. What would the rest of the Catholic world say? And the Pope knows he's got an advantage. So the result is nothing. The Pope will continue to sit there in the Vatican, a self-proclaimed prisoner of the Vatican. And the Italian state, although they now control everything and have just made Rome their capital, can't do anything about him. He's still there. Once again, the Pope will proclaim a Jubilee Year in 1875, but once again it doesn't happen. But the fact that he's there still says something. And oddly, he still has a lot more power than people think. Why? I suppose because his power has never been based solely on temporal affairs, on political power, on grand alliances and things of that sort. At rock bottom, his authority has always been founded on Peter and Paul. It's always been founded on the spiritual side of his ministry here in this world. The rest of it has all been incidental. It comes and goes. But the Jubilees just keep going on, whether you can have a grand celebration or not. They keep being proclaimed every 25 years, or more. There's no putting an end to that continuity which reflects, once again, the whole purpose for an earthly head of the church. The first modern Jubilee is the Jubilee of 1900. This is during the pontificate of Pope Leo XIII. The popes and the Kingdom of Italy are still at odds, but strangely enough, in 1900, a lot of the old passions seem to have died down a bit. The King of Italy actually gives his endorsement to the Pope's Jubilee of 1900. I suppose he's thinking it'll be good for the economy. Pack those tourists in, whatever they're there for. Maybe he also sees it as a way of showing the world that, well, he's not really so at war with the church at all. It's just papal stubbornness that's preventing some sort of accommodation. But whatever the reason, he backs the idea. Kind of strange. As for the Pope, who's an old man, he's 90 years old in 1900. When he announces sends out the letter for the Jubilee year, he can still recall to his audience out there, now spread all around the world, he can recall his early memories of the last Jubilee back in 1825. He was there. And he's determined to do whatever he can to once again put on a good show for the people, something that will encourage them to have a good time while they are deepening their faith. Right? Always the two prongs to this. And this is not a bad, he doesn't have a bad showing here. Leo IX, who does so much in his pontificate to get over the hump of Pius IX and all that unpleasantness back there. Leo XIII, who is an innovator in a way that Pius IX could never have been. But here he's banking on the tradition of all those jubilees of years past, and hoping that this will once again become a means to restoring faith, at least among faithful Catholics. The Jubilee of 1925 under Pius XI continues this process of bringing the church sort of back to normal. In 1925, well, we're just a few years after the end of the First World War. This Jubilee comes along at a very good time, a time when people are, well, looking for some consolation after all the death and destruction of the worst war that, the most awful war that anybody had seen up until this time, and in which Italy had suffered severely. Was also a time of great hopes that the world of the future might be better. But unfortunately, a lot of people are still looking in the wrong places for that. This is the time when fascism is on the rise in Italy, when, revolution has already swept through Russia, and the threat of communism is on everybody's mind. And it's a time, let's get a couple of years past that, time of the Great Depression, when all those other things are just going to be magnified. Clouds are gathering on the horizon once again, and, in between this 1925 Jubilee and the next one, you know what happens. The Second World War, an even worse war, an even more terrible one. A time in which the popes once again, the Pope, Pius XII, will find himself besieged in his Vatican palace. He had troubles enough with Mussolini before the war, and in the early stages of it. There's even more trouble once the Germans have taken charge and occupied most of Italy, including Rome, keeping the Pope safely locked up there in the Vatican. Once it's over in 1950, the world's once again looking for a return to normalcy. And the 1950 Jubilee is really something to celebrate. Talk about liberation. Rome has literally been liberated from the Germans, liberated from Mussolini as well. And maybe the future does look a little bit brighter. And who do we have to thank for it? We have to thank God, but we also have to thank the Pope, who was there through it all and never bent. The Pope Pius XII in 1950 is a hero to the world. And his Jubilee leads to a great outpouring of emotion and gratitude on the part of the people of Rome especially, but of Catholics and people of goodwill all around the world. 1950 is a time for other important announcements, and the Jubilee becomes the showcase for these. This is the year in which the Pope proclaims the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception. He does it during the festivities surrounding the Jubilee year. It's also the first Jubilee, these are the first Jubilee observances to be broadcast by radio, so that a much wider audience can participate in this, at least at a distance. And as for Rome itself, something like 3 million people, and think about the times you're living in, the immediate aftermath of the war, a time when everybody is still recovering and has got a long time to go before they're fully recovered. Nevertheless, 3 million people visit Rome during that year for the Jubilee. 1975. See, now we're getting into your own territory here. All that stuff from the 14th century might sort of go right off the duck's back, but these are things that many of you are going to remember. The Jubilee of 1975, Paul VI's reign. Paul, in calling for this Jubilee year officially, hopes that it will be a time of joy, of conversion, of reconciliation, and renewal. Where we heard all those words before. We heard them last week. This was what the Hebrew Jubilee was supposed to be. That's what Paul hopes this one will be. Even more people turn out for these events. It's the 10th anniversary of the close of the Vatican Council, which everybody's been talking about through all that time. more, more choppy waters to sail through, but an optimistic time to be sure. Pius XII had the radio. Pope Paul has got television. Pope Paul has also got, in Pope Paul's time, the world has become a much smaller place. Air travel has shrunk everything, made it possible for people to come from the other side of the world to these events. Total attendance at this 1975 Jubilee will be something like 9 million at all of its various events. And then, well, we get to John Paul II. Now we're really caught up to date. John Paul manages to hold at least three, if I got my numbers right, at least 3 jubilees. One in 1983, marking the 1950th anniversary of the Redemption. One in 1987, the Marian Year. And then, of course, the great Jubilee of the year 2000. If the turn of a century is something to be anxious and hopeful about at the same time, is the case, the turn of a millennium is even more so. But here we have what he called a great Jubilee, with something for everybody. Special events for just about every constituency in the church that you can imagine. For priests, for bishops, for religious, for lay people, for this group, for that group, for some other group. Especially, you might remember this as the occasion of World Youth Day. Those young people who are always so dear to John Paul's heart. Now here we got, this is almost perfect. We haven't had anything quite like this in a long time. This is maybe the perfect Jubilee. It's a date to mark on your calendar. It's a Jubilee masterminded by a great spiritual man, a charismatic man, a man in whom people saw even when he was living among us as a saint in our midst. If we want to renew the church, well, he's certainly the guy to do it. But he's also a born showman. He's energetic, he's photogenic, he's trained in theater. He knows how to put on a good show, how to take a spiritual experience and make it into something that people will remember and take to heart. That's always been the papal strategy throughout these 700 years. And as somebody who was in Rome when all this stuff was going on, you can see it all. You could see people coming, hordes of people coming in from every country in the world, showing off the universality of the church, the tenacity of the faith, even in the face of all kinds of persecutions and difficulties. All laid out on this grand stage of the city of Rome, which has been, century after century embellished and beautified and reorganized, in large part to accommodate these Jubilee celebrations. What you saw then was construction all over town. As new buildings are going up, as old buildings are being renovated and restored, as they're digging up the streets for desperately trying to finish some more of the metro line underneath, as they're laying tracks for the tram lines. Where's all this coming from? It's coming from that same instinct that people have had since the beginning. The popes want this to be a spiritual experience, but they know in order to do so, they have to do a lot of practical things. They have to make it attractive to people. They have to make it something that people will want to come to and throw themselves into. And that means a lot of, ordinary little things that have to be done. A lot of this work, even here in 2000, was financed by the Vatican or by private donors or groups of donors who wanted to be part of all this, making it all happen. But a lot of it was also financed by the city of Rome and the Italian state for the same kind of reasons that we've seen. It's good for the business. The restaurants will be packed, hotels will be full. It's always a mix. That's life in this world. But here is something that the church, drawing upon those ancient precedents back there in the ancient Hebrew world, dusting them off and repurposing them for the ever-changing needs of the church, century to century, but always with the same purpose: to deepen people's spiritual life, to deepen their faith, but to do it by appealing to human beings as they are at all these different levels. To make it into something that they will always remember and take to heart. The proof of the church's spiritual intent, I think, can easily be seen in our little historical account here. Because what do you see? You see the blessings of the Jubilee extended century to century, farther and farther out, and more generously all the time. We reduce those intervals to make it possible for more and more people to participate. We find ways of decentralizing, in a way, the Jubilee. We have it this year, for instance. You don't have to, if you can't go to Rome, you don't have to. You can receive all the same benefits of the Jubilee year right here by visiting the churches in the Diocese of Columbus that have been designated as Jubilee churches. You can walk through their holy door, and it's every bit as good as walking through the holy door in Rome. The church wants everybody to participate, wants everybody to benefit from this. Despite, the natural drag that goes with life in this world. The drag of pride, the drag of sin, the drag of political complications, the drag of our human nature. But the church has also always found ways of turning some of those things into pluses. We're over time. I've kept right on going through the bell. We'll stop here and see if you have any questions about anything. What was the what in 2000? Oh, attendance in 2000. Yeah, I got that. Yeah, wait, I got that. 28 million. 28. Yeah. It was packed all year long.
And the main events occur over what period of time?
Oh, they're spread all through the year.
Throughout the entire year.
That keeps people coming. And those people, if they're going to Rome, they can't really stay the whole year.
So whether you get there in February, you get there in October, November, you're still going to have.
Oh yeah, there's still things going on. And that had been the case for a long time too. They very astutely spread out the events. They would have, even centuries ago, they were scheduling canonizations to occur during those holy years. I mean, that brought more people in. All kinds of different events spread through the year to ensure that people would just keep on coming.
You were living there in 2000?
Oh, yeah. You should have seen the cruise route trying to fix the potholes all year long. Mm-hmm. Anybody got anything?
Could you please tell us what churches in the diocese are? I can't. Sorry.
What the churches in the
Can you
diocese?
go over those churches in the diocese? Because I know I read it somewhere.
Not
but
off the top of my head, because I don't even know where they are.
Oh,
I bet we can do it.
I haven't lived here long, I mean, the cathedral, surely, right? Cathedral's one.
Basilica of St. Mary in Lancaster is another.
Okay,
Holy Cross.
Your Holy Cross is the oldest parish.
all right.
Yeah.
I've never even seen any of these places, so I have no idea where they are.
I think Father Keller is going to do this all next week.
Yeah, you're going to hear more about that next week. No, well, I was in there once years and years ago. I just have a vague memory of walking in the door one time. Haven't been there for any kind of liturgy or anything.
If I could.
This is for the recording.
Right. I just want to mention, that for the 2000 Jubilee, we had our own version of that here. And there is, if you look, on the inner door going out, the main doors of the church, if you look to the left as you're facing the street, you'll see the Jubilee cross that was cast and permanently put in the door to commemorate that great year.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kathleen.
A couple of questions. Did the church ever continue any of the practices of the Jewish Jubilee Year, like forgiving debts and things like that?
Well, I don't think there's been, just as there wasn't really anything like that ever happened probably in antiquity, it hasn't happened since. People don't like canceling debts,
And
But spiritualizing it, and what are you receiving in that plenary indulgence? What was the phrase again? That most complete pardon, full and generous, most complete pardon of their sins. What have they been thinking about since 1300? They've been thinking about that as a cancellation of debts. This is what you would have to be. This is what you would have to work off in purgatory. Even after you'd been forgiven, you'd still have to pick up after all the collateral damage of your sins. That's purgatory work. In the early days, they would give, one of the first instances of a plenary indulgence was when the Pope offered an indulgence at the beginning of the First Crusade to anybody who would take up this pilgrimage, long, arduous, dangerous pilgrimage to the East. If you were willing to accept that became a kind of substitute penance for you. In which you could work off that debt by serving the church, serving the Pope, serving the needs of the beleaguered Christians of the East, recovering those holy sites in Jerusalem. This is one of the first occasions in which a plenary indulgence was given. So there's another precedent that the Pope had in front of him when he offered those same kind of privileges for a pilgrimage to Rome.
okay, thank you. And second question, do you know if the Jews celebrate Jubilees still?
Anybody have any idea of that?
That's my topic. The quick answer is no. The reason is that there is as I said in my talk, there's some question whether the Sabbatine years and the 7 of sevens, the 50th year after the 49, were actually how many of those were celebrated. There seem to be some attempts to do it in the record, but since the year 70 and the formation of rabbinical Judaism, in other words, in 70, both Christians and Jews have this problem, two problems actually. First of all, was Jesus a Messiah? And there are different answers. And secondly, what do we do without the temple? And then there are different answers. But the thing is how now to justify people like in the diaspora where you're, first of all, are holding property that has no connection with Joshua or the distribution of it. What do you do about land outside? What about Jews who are living in the Holy Land but are living under Muslim landowners and don't actually own their land? How can they keep? And the rabbi said, well, we can't keep it, so don't worry about it, And then presently, the state of Israel has nationalized all land. And so it only changes hands with the permission of the government. So that sort of kicks the whole system into a cocked hat, as they say up in Boston. Okay? So,
Yeah, well, again, it's the church. It's the church taking an inspiration from this
right.
scriptural precedent, but running with it in a whole different kind of direction.
All the law, the general principle, all the law, especially with regard to those physical and celebratory customs of the old law, have been poured into the new pattern of Christ's church, this new third temple, which is a spiritual edifice, not made from brick and stone, but out of souls welded together by the Holy Spirit, stretching through time and space, eternity, heaven, earth, and purgatory. That all this is part of the new dispensation of grace which Jesus poured out for us on the cross. And so we have the patterns, but those are shadows. Now we're coming into the light. And yet, things which are visible are less certain and more passable, more subject to corruption and falling away than those things which cannot be seen with human eyes and yet which are spiritual. And so we have a new kind of, but the shape is the same thing. One of the things that the old, I was focusing last week on the Jubilee laws pretty much, but if you look at some of the connections to them, one of the things is the requirement to go up, because the Jubilees are connected with the celebration of the Feast of Booth Sukkot. I mentioned this, 50 days after Passover. But they would go up, this is one of the pilgrimage feasts, you have to go up to the temple. You have to go through the doors of the temple to make your pilgrimage. Our Lord went through the east, is certainly brought, how is he brought through the temple? The night he was arrested. They pulled him out. I mean, he spent his entire night, I'm sure, behind, in the Garden of Gethsemane, you've got the hill behind you. You've got before you what's in front of you. I mean, there's nothing to see on that hill except more olive trees. What is in front of you? The only thing in front of you is the Valley Kidron, and then on the other side, the wall of the temple with the single door, the eastern door, the beautiful gate in it that he entered on Palm Sunday, that, and behind which is his whole passion. There's what he was meditating. And that, the idea is knocking on the door, coming through the door, this is the end and culmination of your pilgrimage. And in a sense, all these things come together. I'm sort of getting into some preaching I've been thinking about, but knocking on the open heart of Christ and entering the life of God through what flows through there, through that open door that was made for our sins and the compassion of him who loves us first. At any rate.
Okay. Oh, somebody back here. One more.
How can you receive the Jubilee plenary indulgence more than once?
Next week.
Yeah, that's the
Next week, you'll hear all about it from the director of worship himself.
And there are rich possibilities.
Yes. All right. Thank you. Thank you all for coming.